Hi, my name is Eleanor Tatum, and I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief of the New York Amsterdam News. The coronavirus crisis has brought serious distress to local economies and advertising along with them. The New York Amsterdam News has partnered with the Local Media Association during this unprecedented crisis. Help us continue our important work in chronicling the life of Black New Yorkers, and consider making a donation to the COVID-19 Local News Fund today. Go to givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Again, that is givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Thank you and stay safe.
It's Thursday, August 13th, and welcome to the New York Amsterdam News Podcast. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. On this week's episode, my guest is educational expert Dr. Steve Perry. He's going to be speaking with me about the impact COVID-19 is having on the education of Black children, along with the inequalities in public education as students head back to school for the upcoming academic year. Well, it's no surprise that school is going to look a lot different this fall as the COVID-19 pandemic continues. State, local, and national leaders want to ensure that students and teachers are safe as the school year begins. In New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio and Public Schools Chancellor Richard Carranza announced that in-person learning will begin in September for the city's public school students since new COVID-19 infections are low. Families will also have the option of doing remote learning. However, teachers have concerns over safety in schools and want New York City Public Schools to begin with remote learning entirely. And we welcome you to this episode of our podcast, and I'm so happy to have Dr. Steve Perry with me today. You know, he is the founder and head of schools for Capital Preparatory Schools, which has campuses in Harlem and the Bronx. And there are a lot of issues going on right now when it comes to going back to class and COVID-19. And we're going to get into that here shortly with Dr. Perry. Well, it is Thursday, and the paper did come out today, and I have several stories that I want to go over with you. First, our front page story this week is about the historic selection of U.S. Senator Kamala Harris as Joe Biden's pick for vice president. Harris is the first African American to be chosen as the running mate for a major party's presidential candidate. Biden and Harris did their first appearance together at a campaign event in Delaware, where Harris said she's gearing up for a win during November's general election. We also continue our coverage on how COVID-19 is impacting the upcoming school year. City public schools will choose between different combinations of having classes in person or having them remotely. Some of that will depend on the school's resources. Many are considering remote learning for the entire school year, while others are struggling to find the perfect blend. And in our arts and entertainment section, we take a look at some Black-owned B&Bs from around the nation. Some of the B&Bs we've included on the list are in Baltimore, Chicago, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and we even have one in Long Island, New York that we want you to check out. It's a great story that we've got. If definitely, when everybody's ready to go back traveling like myself, you can check out some of those B&Bs. And you can certainly check out more of these stories and more by picking up the paper on newsstands. All we ask is that you do it safely, or you can do it online. Check out these stories online at amsterdamnews.com. Well, my guest this week is educational expert Dr. Steve Perry. He's going to be speaking with me about the impact of COVID-19 on the education of Black children and the inequalities in public schools. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Perry. How are you?
I am having the time of my life.
Well, thank you so much for being on. So here's the thing. We got a lot going on with education when it comes to COVID-19. Some school districts are reopening, some are not. We're doing in-person learning, remote learning. We're seeing cases going up in some school districts. What's your overall take of what's going on from your standpoint as an educational expert?
Well, no one should ever, first of all, thank you for having me on. Second, no one should ever think that a pandemic is a good thing. It's a pandemic. However, in our case, the pandemic has created an opportunity for us to have deeper conversations about the circumstances that we call public education. It has exposed what many of us have known for quite some time, and that is that not a lot of teaching and learning is going on. And it is also exposed that when you live in certain communities, there's an inherent limitation that is imposed upon you that is unearned. So Black people in particular, Black and brown people in general, have been cordoned off into communities in which our children are not being taught. And this is most noticeable when we went remote. And I say that because I know it. And second, because we shouldn't have been caught off guard. When teachers know and have planned for their lessons, it should not have been this difficult for many of them to pivot. They should have known what they were teaching in the coming weeks. They should have had access to many of the, content that the children should have anticipated learning. You know, if you're an algebra teacher, you know what you got to teach. You know, if you're an English teacher, you know what you have to teach. But what happened was when we went remote, many parents saw, oh, snap, they ain't really teaching nothing. And for years, if you would have asked many children what they learned in school while we were in a brick and mortar setting, they'd say nothing. And we would say, you can't probably learn nothing. You're in school all day. Well, the data, especially in Black and brown communities, says exactly that. That they've not been learning. 89% of the 10th graders that we accepted into Capital Prep in Harlem are below grade level. Of that 89%, another 89% are at least 2 grade levels behind. And of that group, over 65% are at least 3 grade levels behind.
Oh, wow.
So COVID has exposed that our kids are not being taught.
Okay. One thing I did want to definitely ask you about is remote learning. The digital divide was exposed very much as a lot of school districts went to remote learning, including New York City, where many students didn't even have internet access, let alone the material or the equipment to be able to participate in remote learning. Talk to us a little bit about the digital divide, how it's impacting education when it comes to Black children.
Not as vast as we once thought it was. We thought that as high as 70, 80% of kids didn't have access to the internet. Truth is, what we found and what my colleagues in other schools have found, it's about 10%. And in some of those cases, it's more nuanced 10%, meaning that there are 3 kids in the family. They have 1 laptop. So it's hard for them to go online with 3 different kids. So it isn't that they don't have any access. It's that they didn't have discrete access. So in most cases, schools have had, and again, part of what I do is work to dispel some of the myths that we often hold to, especially in cities like New York, that have been authored by the overwhelmingly white, middle-class, female teachers union, to remove accountability from them and to cast upon our families a sense of responsibility for the conditions that we find our children under. And so when that group can convince the body politic that the reason that they can't teach is during remote learning is because the kids, they're doing it for the kids because the kids don't have access, then that absolves them of responsibility for instruction. It also limits the expectations upon them, and it puts them in a position where they can be at home with their kids, take care of their own responsibilities, teach their own kids, and still be paid full salary and benefits. We, as Black people in particular, have to wake up. And again, New York has a a rich history of fighting for educational justice. Community-controlled schools in the 60s were the direct result of these same conditions. In 1968, 2% of the children attending elite high schools, the test high schools, were Black. In 2020, that number is 3%. It is not because Black parents don't value education. It is not because Black children don't want to learn. It is not because of digital divide. It's not because of poverty. It's not because of fatherlessness. It's not because of any of those things. It is because we know that when our children are being taught by Black people, all you need is one African American in a child's life as a teacher to increase the probability of that child going to college by 40%. So we know that the overwhelming majority of our children will have few, if any, Black teachers. Similarly, when there is no accountability, when there is no implication for underperformance, when you can simply say, well, the kids are poor. They came to school not knowing as many words as the other kids. Bad study habits. They have to take care of their siblings. They have to get a job. All these are progressive lies that are told because they're overstated. I work in the schools in Bridgeport, in Harlem. Our school's called Harbor, so it mixes me up sometimes. In Harlem, and we have a school in Bridgeport, called Harbor, and then we opened a school in the Bronx. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about things that I don't know. I'm saying we do surveys of our parents, and we asked them. We had average daily attendance of over 85% during COVID. Daily attendance of over 85%. How is that possible? It's possible because we pushed our teachers to teach. Because even in those schools that claimed that they were doing online learning, they were lying. They were not doing online learning. What they were doing is they were sending home emails. They call them packets. And they would tell parents, hey, here's the packet. Go do it. Imagine, if you will, someone went to medical school and that's how they learned. Someone sent home an email and said, hey, here's how you open heart surgery. Good luck. Bye. We have synchronized, meaning happening at the same time, live, meaning somebody is on the other line as a Zoom, instruction. Now, mind you, not all my faculty were jumping up and down about this. You know, many of them were frightened out of their minds. COVID. Many of them wanted to take care of their parents and children and families, and many of them didn't want to have to focus on instruction. Cool. Take vacation. Take vacation. Take sick days. But in the meantime, somebody has to teach Black children and Latino children who have been systematically denied access to what Ben Franklin said was integral to democracy, an educated electorate. So we, as Black people, have to stop allowing the people that we pay to teach our children to get off the hook. These numbers that we see in terms of underperformance in our schools have been in place for generations now. We have generations of data. And in some cases, some of the same people who were teaching our parents are teaching our children. Same exact people, same human beings. Mr. Johnson, Mr. Smith, the same people. And the same conditions persist because our community doesn't have either access or will to take a look at the system. And the reason why I call it a system is not because I'm some sort of conspiracy theorist. It's because a system is a set of behaviors, rules, and regulations that consistently produce the same results. That's a system. The education system in writ large in America, and specifically in New York City, has been designed to make sure that white people teach in it. It has been designed to make sure that, primarily, and that it's run by a centralized board in conjunction with the teachers union, and the two of them split ownership. And the existential threat to that is community control by way of charter schools, by way of taking over local school systems. That is the existential threat to the system, to the guaranteed patronage system that is referred to as the public education system.
All right. My other question for you was that, the pandemic, when it comes to education, also exposed disparities that we already knew were there in terms of funding for schools in certain districts. New York State, for example, has about 700 districts, some mostly white, some mostly black, some mixed. But, there's obviously some schools have an advantage because of their funding that they receive or funding that they have or donations that they get or whatever to be able to make adequate adjustments for COVID-19 for in-person learning, with PPE and cleaning supplies and things like that. Are we seeing these disparities even more exaggerated as this goes forward? Because some schools will not be able to be able to accommodate for COVID-19. What are your thoughts on that?
Not in the least. Again, I know these things that I'm saying may sound like it's implausible, but rarely do people actually look at what the actual per pupil funding is for failed schools. The issue is not how much money these schools are getting. It's not. They actually are getting ample funding to run their schools. They are. Most of your neighborhood schools get more money than the Catholic schools, many, quite frankly, even some of the private schools. Believe it or not, per pupil, they actually do. What they don't have is accountability. No one takes the time to look at what the district is spending its money on. If money were the issue, then we should send our kids to prison, because that's where we spend the most money on kids. Spend 3 times as much money on a child to lock them up than we do to send them to high school in New York City. So that's not the issue. It's not how much money we're spending. It's how we're spending the money. The how is the issue. Over 90% or 85 to 90% of all money that is going into your neighborhood public school goes to salaries. That's it.
Wow.
Paying people to work there.
Wow.
It's not buying PPE. It's not buying computers. It ain't paying rent, because all those places are paid for.
Right.
It's not even it is paying adults. And again, there's a fantastic book that I strongly suggest you read. It's called The Strike That Changed New York. Mm-hmm. And it shows how the UFT has this steady drumbeat of we need more. We need more resources. We need more money. We need more resources. We need more money. And what happens is we think, oh, yeah, that's got to be the case, because of a book that was called Savage Inequalities. It said that because some districts get more money than others, that's why those schools are doing better. It's not true. It's actually not true. Let me tell you why we're having this conversation, but let's just break it completely down.
Sure, absolutely.
Think about this. In the 50s and 60s, there are a couple programs that the government put in place to support newly arrived immigrants, white immigrants from Europe, Italian, Irish, and they were public works, where people would come in and they would work for the city, right? why you see so many Italians who work for the city, right? These political patronage gigs. And these political patronage gigs were connected to unions. So the two of them, just like old school mafia, work together. They work hand in glove. You make sure you give our boy here, and this is not to be disparaging, it's just is what it is. This Italian man here, give him a job, give him his cousin a job, and look and see. You can see for generations who was working those jobs, civil service jobs. They put in place civil service examinations so that certain people would get in, yada, yada, yada. The same process is in place for the public schools. It's the same exact thing. And the objective is to have as many employees as possible for the union so that they can have as much sway as possible. The more sway they have, the more political power they have. The more political power they have, the more jobs they can create. It's a really simple, short walk. Simple, short walk. So let's just take it to public education in New York City. If you presume for a moment that there are 1 million children in New York City's public schools, that's approximately 50,000 teachers, give or take. Of the 50,000, most of them are in a teachers union. Most of them, with the exception of ours, who work in charter schools. So, at 50,000 teachers, each teacher pays to the Federation, United Federation of Teachers, approximately $1,500 a year in dues. That's $75 million that the UFT receives per year in dues. Their objective is to increase that by increasing the number of people who work in the schools. So when they say that they want more, they need more resources, what they're talking about are more people who get more salary so they can take more money out of their salaries. It's simple extortion. Simple. They don't ask them, hey, can I take $1,500? I'll tell you, it is the law. If you are working in a public school, you must, A, pass a civil service examination. Remember that. We just talked about that. And B, you must pay the union dues. Those two things. You do those two things, you keep the patronage wheel going. That's nothing to do with children. In fact, in the 60s, they had these schools, MES schools. Basically, these are schools that were created presumably to help children from historically disadvantaged backgrounds. Those schools had more resources. They had 3 teachers in a classroom. 3 teachers in a classroom in the late 60s. And again, I submit to you, as of today, 3% of the children who attend the elite high schools are black. 2% then. The more resources doesn't work if you don't put better resources, a better teacher in front of those children, a better principal in front of those teachers. And if we don't hold them accountable through the intersection of state test scores, daily attendance, parent reflections, all those things, then you are pouring money down the drain.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about more money.
Right.
It's about better instruction.
All right. My final question for you as we wrap up here is, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with Capital Prep? I know that you operate schools, like you said, in Connecticut. You actually have a school in the Bronx and here in the city, in New York City, and you have a school in New York, 2 schools in New York City, the Bronx and Harlem. Tell us about what's going on. What have you all, first of all, tell us what happened in March when this all started. What did you guys do? And what are your plans for the fall?
So ironically, in March, when it happened, I was at Disney for Disney Dreamers Academy.
That's correct. Yeah, I saw you.
An event where Disney brings in about 100 used to be black and brown kids. It's a lot different now.
It is different.
Now they bring in children. A whole different conversation. So that's why I went, because I don't need to go to Disney. Love the organization, but don't need to go every year. But I go because of the black and brown children that they had been bringing for almost a decade. So I was there, and when things started to look really like we were going to not end up in school, which is unimaginable given the fact that that's never happened. Our team hopped on the phone because we weren't even doing Zooms then at all. This just shows how. So we had a meeting on a Friday. I said, we got to teach. And none of my colleagues said, some said yes, some said no. Can't be done. Can't be done is not an option. We don't know how long this thing is going to last. So within a week, we were up and fully running. So let's say our last day of school was on a Friday. The following Monday, not that weekend, but the following Monday, we were up and fully teaching, which means if you had first period at 7:30, you had first period at 7:30, still from your house. We had parents and children meet us at the schools. We handed out laptops. We handed out every laptop that we have. When we found families who, and again, there are not that many, we found families who had absolutely no access to internet. We're talking in Harlem, there might have been 5 out of 500 who had no access. We worked with them to see what we could do, them and the cable company to see what we could do to get them something. So, and then the challenge became, I'll go back to what I was saying about others, the quality of instruction. Some of my colleagues took to it and said, all right, it's what it is, let's get it.
Right.
And then some of them bitched and moaned about how terrible it is and you can't have this much screen time. Kids' eyes are going to have headaches and blah, blah, blah. And they did all that. So we had some internal strife as well, where people were upset that they would even have to do it. But what the hell? What else are we going to do?
Right, you have to do it, yeah.
You know that you got to do something. What you just going to do? Let them sit there?
Right.
In the house with the parents, they can't leave. And at that point, remember, we were shelter in place, so we couldn't even do nothing. We could go nowhere.
Right, exactly.
So you have 3 kids in an apartment in New York City,
mm-hmm.
and they just sitting there watching television from dawn to dusk, or not, they usually weren't watching TV, sitting up on communicating with their friends via the internet.
Right.
Come on, man. No. So we had to get it. So now what we're doing is we prep for the fall.
Okay.
In Harlem and the Bronx, we're going to go 100% remote now.
Okay.
We're going to start there. And in Connecticut, we're going to go hybrid. And the reasons are because of the physical spaces and the difference in laws and the difference.
Right.
I don't know if it's a law, but the difference in regulations in each state. In New York, it's hard, fast. You got to be 6 feet apart.
Right.
And we can't be 6 feet apart in New York in our location, one of our locations. Okay. We would end up with a schedule where you'd only end up going to physical school once a week, and it just is goofy. So we're not doing that. Okay. It's just too disruptive.
Right.
But in Connecticut, we have what we refer to as AB days. So you will go to school on Monday and Wednesday. I will go to school on Tuesday and Thursday, and on Friday we would have our individual meetings with our teachers.
Okay.
For extra help.
Okay. Let me ask you this: do you think? Give me your prediction of what you think is going to happen in the next few months. Are we going to ever see, maybe by the end of the year, students rather going back to school full time in person? Are we going to see that in the future? When do you think that will happen?
I think we're going to be back home by November.
Okay.
I don't think it. I think that. I think that educators are being, I'll call it dramatic. In ways that other professions are not. Frontline healthcare workers don't get a choice. They have to go to work. And they don't wonder if they're going to come across a sick kid. They're going to work with sick people. And they don't have any more in terms of protections than we do. None.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So how is that they can go to work wearing a mask,
right,
and work with sick people, but we have to do public theater of writing wills? It's not cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much, Dr. Perry, for coming on this episode of the podcast. We truly appreciate you, and we definitely hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
That concludes this week's podcast. You can pick up the latest edition of the New York Amsterdam News on newsstands and get updates online at amsterdamnews.com. You can also keep up with us on Facebook at NY Amsterdam News and follow us on Twitter at NYAmNews. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. Thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Eleanor Tatum, and I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief of the New York Amsterdam News. The coronavirus crisis has brought serious distress to local economies and advertising along with them. The New York Amsterdam News has partnered with the Local Media Association during this unprecedented crisis. Help us continue our important work in chronicling the life of Black New Yorkers, and consider making a donation to the COVID-19 Local News Fund today. Go to givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Again, that is GIVEBUTTER.com/Amsterdam News. Thank you and stay safe.